In North London, roughly 7 miles from Buckingham Palace, there is a street where mansions rot behind golden gates, while families across the city sleep in doorways. 66 properties, £350 million sitting empty. More than 120 bedrooms gathering dust, while the city beyond the gates cannot find affordable places to live. The Bishop's Avenue stretches for nearly 1 mile through Hampstead Garden suburb, connecting the north side of Hampstead Heath to East Finchley. 66 properties line its length. The average house price exceeds £6 million. Some mansions have sold for £50 million. Others sit on the market for £65 million. Yet a third of these properties stand completely empty. Some have been vacant for more than 30 years. Their swimming pools have turned to swamps. Their ballrooms echo only with the sound of water streaming down collapsing walls. Animal skeletons litter carpets that once cushioned the feet of Saudi princes and Greek royalty. Ferns grow through cracks in marble floors that cost more per tile than most Londoners earn in a day. One property developer who owns a house on the street has called it one of the most expensive wastelands in the world. He is not exaggerating. When investigators from The Guardian gained access to the abandoned properties in 2014, they documented more than 120 empty bedrooms in mansions, collectively worth £350 million. The vacancy rate on this single stretch of road was 10 times higher than the national average for England. This is not a story about market fluctuations or economic misfortune. This is a story about a street that reveals something fundamental about modern wealth. The rich no longer need to live in their mansions. They no longer need to furnish them, staff them, or even visit them. Property has become something else entirely, not a home, not even an investment in the traditional sense. Something closer to a vault, a place to hide money that might otherwise be seized, taxed, or traced. The Bishop's Avenue began as something quite different. When construction started in 1894, the street was intended as a setting for expensive houses at the edge of London's expansion suburbs. The land had once belonged to the Bishop of London, part of a hunting park that stretched across what is now Hampstead Garden suburb. A land grant in 1904 formalized the church's ownership, but most of it was sold privately in the early 20th century. Only one property on the road remains in church ownership today. The road was laid out meandering through woodland and farmland, designed to feel like an escape from the industrial city sprawling to the south. The plots were enormous by London standards, 2 to 3 acres each, allowing space for carriage driveways, formal gardens, tennis courts, and the kind of privacy that money could buy in an age before helicopters and drones. The first residents were British industrialists who had made their fortunes in the empire's commercial expansion. William Park Lisle, of the Tate and Lyle Sugar Empire, commissioned Heath Hall in 1910. The mansion rose on a 2-acre plot, its facade a confident statement in red brick and white stone. 17 bedrooms filled the upper floors. A solid oak staircase, crafted by artisans in Italy and shipped to London in pieces, climbed through the central hall. The bathrooms featured 12 different types of marble, each selected for specific rooms, each polished to a mirror finish by workers who would never see the inside of such a home again. By 1912, Heath Hall had established the Bishop's Avenue as the address for those who had transformed colonial commodities into British fortunes. Sugar from the Caribbean, steel from the empire's mines, retail from the department stores that were changing how the middle class shopped. The men who built these mansions believed they were founding dynasties that would last generations. The street earned its first nickname in the 1930s, Millionaire's Row. The title was not ironic. George Sainsbury of the supermarket dynasty owned a property there. So did Sir Billy Butlin, founder of the holiday camps that bore his name. The most famous resident of that era was Gracie Fields, the highest-paid film star in the world by 1937. She and her husband Archie Pitt built a 28-room mansion called Tower in 1929, naming it after the music hall show that had made her famous. The house featured servant quarters, landscaped gardens, and everything a celebrity of the golden age might require. When Gracie and Archie separated in the early 1930s, she donated the house to a maternity hospital, Babies were born in the same rooms where parties had once entertained London society. That building was eventually demolished. The site where it stood would later become one of the street's most notorious ruins. By the 1980s, everything had changed. The street upgraded its nickname from Millionaire's Row to Billionaire's Row. The transformation reflected not just inflation, but a fundamental shift in who was buying and why. British industrialists who had built things were replaced by international buyers who had extracted things. The mansions remained the same. The purpose of ownership became something entirely different. Iranians arrived first. After the 1979 revolution, sent the Shah fleeing and his supporters scrambling to move wealth beyond the reach of the new Islamic Republic. Eastern Europeans appeared after the collapse of the Berlin Wall. Oligarchs who had somehow acquired state assets during the chaos of privatization, converting factories and mines into London property before regulators could trace the transactions. Chinese businessmen came as their economy opened, fortunes emerging faster than any oversight system could track, seeking the stability of British law and the opacity of British property registration. The diversity was remarkable. The pattern was consistent. Financial storms at home sent money fleeing to London. The Bishop's Avenue became, in the words of one estate agent who had watched the transformation unfold, a landing pad for wealthy investors in developing countries undergoing geopolitical chaos. The new buyers had different needs than the sugar magnates and film stars. They did not require places to live. They required places to hide, properties that could absorb fortunes without attracting attention, addresses prestigious enough to confer status but anonymous enough to preserve secrecy. The Bishop's Avenue offered both. But the most significant buyers arrived during the Gulf War, and they were not hiding from revolutions. They were preparing for one that never came. Between 1989 and 1993, the Saudi royal family purchased 10 mansions on the Bishop's Avenue. The acquisitions were not random. They were strategic. With Saddam Hussein's Iraq threatening the region, the House of Saud wanted an escape route. If they were ever deposed, they would have somewhere to flee. The invasion never reached Saudi Arabia. The escape was never necessary, and so the mansions sat empty. For more than 2 decades, the Saudi properties have remained largely unused. The Guardian investigation estimated their combined value at £73 million. They changed hands again in 2013, sold to developers for approximately £80 million. As of this writing, planning applications continue. Some mansions have been demolished, others still stand, decaying behind their gates. What investigators found inside these properties defies comprehension. Urban explorers who have penetrated the abandoned mansions describe scenes from a post-apocalyptic film set in a palace. Gold banisters that once gleamed under crystal chandeliers now sit covered in dust, so thick it obscures the metalwork beneath. Stained glass windows, imported from European artisans at costs that could have purchased entire houses elsewhere, filter weak light onto floors strewn with debris from collapsed ceilings. Elaborate plasterwork moldings have fallen in chunks, revealing the wooden laths beneath like exposed bones. Swimming pools that were once heated to precise temperatures, maintained by staff who checked the chemistry daily, have transformed into murky ponds. Leaves float on their surfaces. Algae creeps up the tiles that line their walls. The changing rooms beside them retain their fixtures. The lockers still closed, the showers still mounted, everything frozen in a moment of abandonment that somehow lasted decades. Indoor spas and saunas, built with cedar wood imported from Canada and heating systems engineered in Germany, have rusted into dysfunction. The wood has warped, the electronics have corroded. The spaces designed for relaxation now feel like tombs. One property, called The Towers, stood as perhaps the most elaborate example of unused opulence. The mansion featured a banqueting hall, capable of seating dozens of guests beneath coffered ceilings. An indoor squash court occupied one wing. A swimming complex with heated pools and spa facilities filled another. A fully equipped gymnasium awaited workouts that would never happen. A sunken dance floor, built for parties that were never thrown, descended below the level of the surrounding rooms. The Towers was never lived in, not once, not a single night. The house stood empty and unloved for 2 decades, gradually deteriorating, occasionally penetrated by urban explorers who filmed its decay for content. Fire destroyed it in 2023. The blaze came only weeks after another derelict mansion nearby was badly damaged by flames. The year before, yet another empty mansion on the opposite side of the street met the same fate. The fires seemed almost merciful, ending the slow humiliation of structures built to impress but abandoned to rot. The smaller details prove somehow more disturbing than the grand architectural decay. Conservatories retain the strangest artifacts of lives interrupted. Ashtrays still sit on rattan tables, cigarettes long since turned to dust, but the glass dishes remaining. Magazines from nearly 20 years ago lie stacked high on coffee tables, their covers faded but their pages readable, fashion advice and celebrity gossip frozen in a moment when someone still cared enough to subscribe. Newspapers from the early 2000s rest open on kitchen counters, headlines about wars that have since ended, and politicians who have since died. It appears as though the owners simply walked out one day and never returned, which, in many cases, is exactly what happened. Some properties were abandoned after purchases fell through, others were left by owners who died, their estates tangled in legal disputes that dragged on for years. Still others were simply forgotten, assets and portfolios so vast that individual mansions became rounding errors, not worth the attention required to maintain or sell them. In one property, animal skeletons litter the rotting carpets. Owls and pigeons entered through broken windows, nested in the grand rooms, and eventually died there. Their remains scatter across floors that once cushioned the feet of guests attending parties where champagne cost more than the average British monthly salary. The contrast between the intended grandeur and the actual squalor feels almost deliberate, as though the houses are making a point about the futility of certain kinds of ambition. One resident of the avenue, an Egypt-born doctor named Magdi Adib Ishaq Hana, told reporters that he had never met his neighbors despite living on the street for years. He believed as few as 3 of the properties were occupied full-time. Another resident from Iran was more blunt about the experience. 95% of the people who live here do not actually live here, he said. It is a terrible place to live, really. It is very boring, and the road is very busy. I do not think many people want to live in such big houses anyway. The ownership structures reveal why accountability is so difficult. 60% of properties on the Bishop's Avenue are registered to companies in offshore tax havens: the British Virgin Islands, Curacao, the Bahamas, Panama, and the Channel Islands. These jurisdictions allow owners to avoid stamp duty, remain anonymous, and obscure the true source of their wealth. The result is a street where nobody knows who their neighbors are, where fortunes of uncertain origin sit frozen in bricks and mortar, where the most expensive real estate in Britain generates nothing except rising land values for people who will never see them. Consider the case of Ali Ansari. In October 2025, the United Kingdom government sanctioned this Iranian businessman for allegedly funding the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The sanctions included an asset freeze and travel ban. Records revealed that Ansari controlled a company called Birch Ventures Limited, registered in the Isle of Man. That company owns 12 properties on the Bishop's Avenue, 12 mansions on a single street, owned by a man now accused of financing terrorism, sitting empty behind gates while their value quietly appreciates. Or consider the mansion seized following a high court judgment against a Kazakh businessman accused of $6 billion in banking fraud. The property was confiscated. It remains empty. Or the repossessed home of Waqar Ahmed Khan, the former Pakistani Minister of Privatization. The windows have been sealed with heavy iron bars. No one lives there. But the most dramatic story on the Bishop's Avenue is not about empty mansions at all. In the early hours of New Year's Day, 1985, police were called to number 66. Inside, they found the body of Aristos Constantinou lying in a pool of blood. Constantinou was a Greek Cypriot fashion tycoon, the founder of the Ariel clothing label that had defined swinging London in the 1960s. He had arrived in Britain as the son of a master tailor, enrolled at the London College of Fashion, and worked out of a back room on Carnaby Street, creating styles that came to epitomize the era. By 1977, he was wealthy enough to buy a mansion on Billionaire's Row. His brother Achilles purchased the house next door. On the night of his murder, Aristos had returned from a New Year's Eve party with his wife, Elena. He was 40 years old, at the peak of his success, living in one of the most exclusive addresses in Britain. Someone shot him 6 times at close range with nickel-jacketed bullets from an Italian-made Fiocchi pistol that had gone out of production in 1961. The ammunition was silver-colored, which gave the crime its nickname, the Silver Bullet Murder. The initial account suggested a burglary gone wrong. Glass had been smashed in the kitchen door. A safe was open. Approximately 50,000 pounds was missing. Elena told police she had been grabbed by masked intruders and locked in an upstairs bathroom before escaping through a window and down a drain pipe. But the story began to unravel. Family members challenged Elena's account. Witnesses claimed to have seen Aristos and Elena with a small pistol similar to the murder weapon. A former housekeeper reported seeing the gun in a safe in the couple's bedroom. Multiple sources suggested Elena was having an affair. At the inquest, Elena herself identified the father of her alleged lover as one of the masked burglars. More than 40 years later, the case remains officially unsolved. In 2017, the Metropolitan Police reopened the investigation. In 2022, Aristos' brother Achilles told reporters that detectives had identified who they believed murdered his brother. As of this writing, no charges have been brought. The mansion where Aristos died eventually sold. The chapel where some accounts placed the shooting was removed during renovation. The house remains one of the few properties on the street with a known and documented history. Most of its neighbors keep their secrets better guarded. The Bishop's Avenue has played host to other distinguished residents whose stories ended elsewhere, but whose presence added to the street's mythology. King Constantine II of Greece, the last king before the abolition of the Greek monarchy in 1973, lived near the street for 46 years after being forced into exile by the colonel's coup. His 13-bedroom mansion overlooked the Hampstead Heath extension, its gardens stretching across nearly an acre of some of the most valuable land in Britain. The property featured 10 bathrooms, multiple reception rooms, and grounds that included a swimming pool where royal children learned to swim far from the country they had been expelled from. Princess Diana was a frequent visitor to Constantine's home in the 1990s. She would drive Prince William and Prince Harry to parties at the mansion in her convertible sports car, the young princes mixing with Constantine's grandchildren in the Gardens of Exile. The connection between the families ran deep. Constantine had been named Prince William's godfather at his christening in 1982. When Constantine's first grandson was born years later, he returned the honor, making William the godfather in turn. The relationship endured across decades. Constantine attended royal events in Britain whenever his health permitted. He and Prince Charles remained close friends. The British royal family regarded him as one of their own, a cousin who had lost his kingdom, but never his standing among the dynasties that still retained theirs. Constantine died in January 2023 at the age of 82. His mansion sold during lockdown for just under £6 million. He had purchased it in 1967 for £325,000, fleeing Greece with his family as his throne collapsed beneath him. Even in death, even in exile, even having lost everything that once defined his status, the Bishop's Avenue had generated returns. The property appreciated more than 18-fold across the decades of his residence. The street took care of its own, even those who had lost their kingdoms. The question that haunts the Bishop's Avenue is not why the mansions were bought, but why they are allowed to rot. The answer lies in what London property has become for international wealth. Buying a house on Billionaire's Row is a statement of status, a signal that you have arrived. But living there is unnecessary. The property appreciates whether you occupy it or not. The land value rises regardless of whether the roof caves in. One estate agent who has worked the street for decades explained the economics plainly. Properties here come at a third of the price of central London, he said. The buyers are not looking for homes, they are looking for vaults. This dynamic has created what economists call a safe haven asset market. When financial storms threaten wealth at home, the advice is consistent. Shelter your money in London property, the jurisdiction is stable, the legal system protects ownership, the tax structures favor foreign buyers who register through offshore vehicles. The consequence is a street where some of the most expensive homes in Britain serve no purpose except to store value. They are Gatsby-esque warehouses for foreign capital, appreciated but unlived in, maintained just enough to hold together, rarely visited, never truly occupied. Meanwhile, across London, the housing crisis deepens with each passing year. More than 36,000 properties in the capital are registered as long-term vacant. More than 250,000 homes across England have been unused for at least 6 months. Families are priced out of the city where they work, commuting hours each day because they cannot afford to live near their jobs. Young professionals share cramped flats with strangers, their dreams of home ownership receding further with each rise in property prices. The contrast could hardly be more stark. On one side of this equation, families spending 40 or 50% of their income on rent, unable to save for deposits, unable to imagine a future where they own anything at all. On the other side, mansions with dozens of bedrooms sitting empty for decades, their owners unable to be located, their value climbing steadily regardless of whether anyone remembers they exist. And on the Bishop's Avenue, another ceiling collapses in another empty ballroom. Another swimming pool fills with leaves and algae. Another garden returns to wilderness behind gates that have not opened in years. The properties appreciate, the owners profit. The city around them struggles to house the workers who keep it functioning. There have been attempts to imagine alternatives. In 2023, Britain's leading architects drew up blueprints for transforming the abandoned Saudi mansions into hundreds of affordable homes. Firms including May, which had recently won the Sterling Prize, calculated that up to 300 homes could be built on one particular derelict site. The proposal would have converted some of the most exclusive land in Britain into housing for essential workers. The plans were speculative. They were never implemented. The site remains in private hands, subject to planning applications for luxury apartments that have dragged on for years. David Ireland, chief executive of a campaign group called Homes from Empty Homes, summarized the situation. This illustrates everything that is wrong with the London housing market, he said. The high values are being used as an extreme investment vehicle at the expense of homes being homes. London's shortage of homes is so great that this feels immoral and dysfunctional. There are countless people in inadequate housing, and here are homes on the Bishop's Avenue that could be used. But councils lack the powers to intervene. Compulsory purchase would cost more than local authorities can afford. The properties are often owned by companies registered in jurisdictions that make tracing beneficial, owners nearly impossible. One Labour politician noted the challenge directly. A lot of the sites are owned by companies that may well be registered in the Cayman Islands or wherever else, he said. It is quite hard to keep track of. Today, the Bishop's Avenue is undergoing what developers call a transformation. The mega mansions are being converted into apartment blocks. Care homes have replaced some of the abandoned properties. Developments featuring luxury flats are rising, where single-family palaces once stood in ruin. The change is driven by simple economics. Nobody wants 25-bedroom mansions anymore, not even billionaires. The future of the street is fragmentation, turning big houses into several units. You do not have to be an oligarch to buy one of these super luxury apartments, one estate agent explained, and that is what is bringing the community back to the road. Whether this transformation represents progress or merely a new phase of the same dysfunction remains unclear. The apartments will cost millions. They will be marketed to international buyers. Many will likely sit empty, just like the mansions they replaced. One resident who has driven down the Bishop's Avenue almost every day for 18 years offered a final assessment. The road had lost its sense of community, he said. A great deal of those extremely large mansions have gone and continue to be eroded away by global developers wanting to reimagine this infamous avenue. He believes the street has gone past the point of no return. There is a quote that captures something essential about the Bishop's Avenue. It comes from Trevor Abramson, a luxury property consultant who has dealt with the street's properties for decades. A house starts off being owned by the Savile Row tailored businessmen with posh voices, he said, and ends up being run by the Mujahideen. He meant it as a joke, probably. A dark observation about how London property passes from old money to new, from legitimate fortunes to questionable ones, from families who built things to individuals who extracted them. But the joke contains a truth that extends beyond this single street. Wealth has been decoupled from place, from community, from any sense of obligation to the cities that host it. A mansion can be purchased, abandoned, allowed to collapse, and still generate returns. The money flows through offshore vehicles, touches no one, benefits nothing except the land registry, and the lawyers who manage the transactions. Standing on the Bishop's Avenue today, looking at gates that have not opened in decades, gardens that have returned to wilderness, swimming pools that have become ponds, a visitor sees the logical endpoint of a certain kind of capitalism. The homes were never really homes. They were statements. They were vaults. They were insurance policies against revolutions that never came. And when the insurance was no longer needed, the properties were simply left to rot. The street that began with British sugar magnates building mansions they actually lived in has become a monument to a different relationship between wealth and place. The money is greater now, the mansions are larger, the technologies are more sophisticated, but nobody is home. The workers who built these properties remain invisible in the historical record. The craftsmen who carved the Italian staircases, the gardeners who maintained the formal landscapes, the cleaners who polished the marble floors until they shone. They left no names behind, only their labor crystallized in stone, wood, and glass. When the mansions were abandoned, their work was abandoned too, their skills rotting along with the structures they created. Perhaps that is what happens when property becomes purely a vehicle for capital preservation. The human element disappears. The house is empty. The communities dissolve. The labor that created the beauty becomes as forgotten as the owners who commissioned it. What remains is a street of gates and security cameras, of warning signs and closed-circuit television monitors, of structures that serve no purpose except to exist, to appreciate, to wait for transactions that may never come. A few miles away, in one of the richest cities on earth, families search for affordable places to live. Nurses who staff the hospitals, teachers who educate the children, cleaners who maintain the offices where deals are made that send more money fleeing to streets like this one. The irony is not lost on anyone who has studied the Bishop's Avenue. The contrast is too stark to ignore, too persistent to dismiss as coincidence. But the street offers no apologies. It simply sits there, 1 mile of accumulated wealth doing nothing at all, proving that the greatest fortunes of our age no longer need to be displayed, enjoyed, or even maintained. They only need to be hidden. And the Bishop's Avenue has become very good at hiding things. It hides money. It hides ownership. It hides the identities of those who have profited from revolutions and coups and frauds that would be prosecuted if anyone could trace them to their source. The gates remain closed. The security cameras watch. The mansions continue their slow collapse behind walls that keep the curious at bay. Perhaps one day the street will transform into something else entirely. Affordable housing on the ruins of excess. Communities where families actually live in homes that were built for living. Gardens where children play instead of wildlife nests and dies. Or perhaps the transformation already underway will simply replace one form of dysfunction with another. Luxury apartments instead of mega mansions. Smaller units for a new generation of investors seeking the same thing their predecessors sought: safety, opacity, a place to park wealth beyond the reach of whoever might be looking for it. The Bishop's Avenue holds no answers. It only holds the question that has haunted it since the first overseas buyer discovered its potential as a vault rather than a home. What happens to a place when it stops being somewhere people live and becomes somewhere money hides? Walk down the street today and you will see the answer. It is not a pleasant sight, but it is honest. And in a world where wealth has become expert at concealment, honesty may be the most disturbing revelation of all.